Mr. Larson will be here. Ms. Burns will be here. So you'll get the testimony about what transpired. There's not a lot of dispute about it. But what happened was that at the site of the regional tournament, which was a big deal, it's an important event, an issue was raised at the last minute about the potential eligibility of one of the players. And it arose because of an NCAA rule. Now, I don't want to speak on behalf of San Diego State about rules, so this is my opinion. There are a lot of NCAA rules that are very picky and seem illogical to many of us. Nonetheless, if an issue arises, and if that issue would result in a player becoming ineligible, and that player was to play in a game while ineligible, then at the end, the whole outcome could be reversed. That is, the result of the game could be reversed because the ineligible player played. So what happens is, at the last moment, this issue gets raised about one of the players' parents' source of funding to come to the tournament. Jay Larson, who is an assistant athletic director in charge of compliance, NCAA rules and compliance with NCAA rules is so significant that you will find that all Division I athletic programs have one or more, and some have a dozen people that are devoted to NCAA compliance, making sure that the university and its students are in compliance. Mr. Larson's present in Memphis. Mr. Larson gets the information. He talks to Coach Burns. He talks to Tammy Stevens, the director of operations. He tells them what he's going to do. He's going to get on the phone with the NCAA. He's going to run this down as soon as possible. He doesn't think it's going to be a big problem. He hopes it's not a big problem. And he gets on the phone and he starts working the phone to get all the facts, talking back and forth to the NCAA, literally on a Friday night before a Sunday game. Somewhere along the line, Mr. Larson steps out of his room, gets in the elevator, and the female, the player, and her sister, who's also a player, who are involved in this in the sense that their father is the funding for the father. He says something to them to the effect that, don't worry about this, I think it's going to be all okay. He finishes running it down. Saturday morning, he gets the good news from the NCAA that if they're ineligible, now they're reinstated, don't worry about it, go forward. He goes down to the elevator, goes down to the hotel lobby to find Coach Burns, they're on their way to a practice, shoot-around practice before the game or whatever. And he goes up to her to deliver the good news, and she just rips into him. Just rips into him. Tells him he's not a team player. How could he dare to talk to one of her players? And just starts berating him and yelling at him in the hotel lobby in front of a whole bunch of people, right at the entrance where the team bus is. She said he wanted to get on the team bus to go to the arena with us, and I told him he couldn't get on the team bus. He wasn't a team player. Well, it finally got to the point that another assistant coach, Mr. Shamil, had to step in and take Coach Burns and get her away and get her on the bus and get going. And I asked Coach Burns in the deposition, well, what did Mr. Larson say to you? She said, he didn't say anything. So this was very concerning because it related to Coach Burns basically yelling at and berating an associate athletic director for doing his job. So this came to the attention of, obviously, Mr. Larson was really offended by it. A lot of people who saw it were offended by the whole scene, and it became an issue. And you see in the head coach evaluation for this year, this is where she gets a 2 out of 5 for interaction with staff. Again, Miss Raymer was there in Memphis. And I'm not going to read this recall to you, but it's somewhat similar to what we'd seen before. And then we get to this paragraph, and again, Mr. Sturck is the athletic director now. Ms. Bramer is Coach Burns' immediate supervisor. And they just say it's not okay to yell at staff or dress them down, no matter the circumstances. Then it goes on to say about another incident we won't discuss now. It says, additionally, it's not okay to hide information from administration. They are your allies and necessary for your campus relationships and for the program's big-scale coverage. So, again, this had been building for a while. And now we had a couple of incidents involving Coach Vanderveer. We had this incident involving Mr. Larson. And again, this is the face of women's basketball at San Diego State University. This is a highly compensated individual. This is a role model at the university for student athletes and others. And we're nonetheless in her evaluation basically trying to cajole her into treating people basically with respect and dignity. That's what it's all about. So what happens after that? Well, again, she's winning. 2010, there's an addendum to her employment agreement, extends her for 5 years to 2015. And now, and this is what Mr. Chapin pointed out to you, and you're going to have to, we'll go through all this. In 2010, Mr. Sturck comes in. He's the new athletic director. He came in about a week before this Memphis incident. There's a new senior associate athletic director, John David Wicker. You heard his name. He's now, Ms. Burns is now reporting to him. And he's the one who's filling out this portion of her evaluation. Mr. Wicker comes in cold in 2010. He doesn't know Coach Burns. Ms. Bramer had filled this role for many years. Ms. Burns went behind Ms. Bramer, went to Mr. Sturck, and complained about Ms. Bramer. He told Mr. Sturck that Ms. Bramer was ineffective. He had gone to Mr. Schemmel. She had gone to Mr. Schemmel, the prior athletic director, many times, and complained about Ms. Bramer, and saying that she was simply ineffective. She was clueless. Ultimately, Mr. Sturck says in 2010, look, maybe we'll start anew. Let's start fresh. I'll let Ms. Bramer supervise another sport, and I'll give you Mr. Wicker. So Mr. Wicker comes in 2010 and in 2011, and he's the one who's doing her evaluations. And the evaluations that you saw, they seem to be, there's not a lot of information on them. Mr. Wicker will testify that in the time period of those evaluations, he did not become aware of any particular incidents involving Coach Burns that were of note. There was a continuing undertone within the athletic department of the university, and it's best characterized by, I think one of the witnesses here, Tammy Reese, will say, oh, that's just Beth being Beth. So this rough, rude, disrespectful treatment of people went on, but it was excused by a lot of people as saying, that's just Beth being Beth. So, in 2011, 2012, Mr. Wicker was not aware of any of these types of incidents involving Coach Burns. There's nothing significant in that respect on her evaluation form. And then we get to, after the 2012 evaluation is completed, other incidents start perking up. And this is in late 2012. Now, counsel suggested to you that all of this started sometime in 2013 after Mr. Barrett and Mr. Wicker met. That's not correct. Mr. Viney will be here to testify. He reports to Mr. Wicker on November 26th or 27th of 2012 an incident that occurred on a Southwest Airlines flight coming from a Thanksgiving tournament in Colorado, in which he was seated on the plane. I'm not going to go through all the details. You'll hear about this and where everyone was sitting. But what happens is that as they're in flight, all of a sudden, Mr. Bynum hears this yelling at him. It's from Coach Burns a couple rows up. And she is yelling at him because her laptop, a program on her laptop wasn't working. He was the director of videographer. This needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed right away. And so this scene starts. Now, the team, everyone's in Aztec travel here at San Diego State University. They're representing San Diego State University. And now we have another scene in which Coach Burns is now yelling at Mr. Bynum. Mr. Bynum has to climb over two people, come up, get down next to Miss Burns, and as he's trying to explain it to help her, she's yelling in his ear. She's yelling, "What do you got, bud? What do you got, bud? What do you got, bud? What do you got, bud?" And he's just flabbergasted. He's trying to fix the problem. He didn't do anything intentionally, and she's throwing a fit. And this is in front of the whole airplane. In fact, the evidence will be after they got off the flight, one of the passengers who was in close proximity came up to one of the assistant coaches and said, "Is she always like that?" So Mr. Bynum, he was the brunt of her temper that day. He did not appreciate it. And he thought that this embarrassed not only him but the university. So he told the senior associate athletic director about it. And I find it very ironic in a case in which we're touting whistleblowers that somehow Mr. Bynum should be criticized because he brought a complaint to the attention of management involving Coach Burns. He had every right to do that. That was an appropriate thing for him to do. That's the way he felt. Mr. Wicker took the complaint, put it in his file, said, "I'm going to have to take this up with Coach Burns in her evaluation," and they all went down life's highway. This was not something that would cause termination. It was obviously a subject of concern because it was a repeat of some prior incidents. February 8th, 2012, there is an encounter between Mr. Wicker, who is now Coach Burns' supervisor, and Mr. Barrett. Mr. Barrett's a 30-ish coach, assistant coach. Coach Burns hired him. He came out from the University of Albany. He was in his first year as an assistant coach. And Mr. Wicker walked by Mr. Barrett and said something like, "Hey, how's it going?" And again, there are different versions of the conversation because these are people that are testifying a year or two after the event, but they're all pretty close to the effect that Mr. Barrett was very upset, was having a lot of difficulty working with Coach Burns, did not think that Coach Burns respected him, and talked about some hitting, and talked about the way she treated him. And it was interesting because he said, "Well, come to the game on Saturday, and you can observe for yourself." So it was that Saturday, that's February 13th of 2013. And while Mr. Wicker went to the game, he didn't actually see the incident because he was sitting behind the bench. But what happened, and we're going to spend more time on that video that you saw. And it kind of goes pretty quickly. And I heard a reference to Adam Barrett's in his 30s, and he's 6'2", and he's a strong guy, and he's an athletic guy. So I'm not sure what the point is there. Is the point that Coach Burns can strike Mr. Barrett because he's 6'2" and he's strong and young and she didn't intend to hurt him? I'm not sure what the message is. There were two incidents in there on the video where Coach Burns obviously loses her temper during the course of the game and takes it out on Mr. Barrett. And we're not talking about yelling and berating at that point in time. We're talking about physical hands-on. Physical hands-on. If you look at the second portion of that video, She is upset. He's seated next to her. She takes her right hand and she slams it against his shoulder and then turns her face towards him and yells in a very angry fashion. And you'll see that on the video. Now, in the aftermath of that, we took depositions in the case. Coach Burns testified, I didn't hit anybody. Play the video for her. Oh, I touched him. Oh, it was incidental contact. Oh, I don't remember it. What did you yell? I don't know. I don't even remember this. That's the problem. That's the problem. She gets angry, she loses her temper, and she loses control of her temper. Mr. Barrett's position was, I didn't think she was going to beat me up. But you know what you saw on the video of February 13, 2013? I don't even remember it. And the reason I don't remember it was she did it all the time. She hit me like that all the time. You're going to hear testimony of Queenie Soriano, who is the athletic trainer for San Diego State University, at the games. She would attend the games. She said, I saw the hitting. I saw the hitting that went on. She saw various people being struck by Coach Burns. Again, this is not Coach Burns trying to beat anybody up. It's Coach Burns in a peak or fit of anger or intensity getting physical with people. You're also going to hear testimony that Mr. Barrett was not the only recipient of Coach Burns' hands-on treatment, but there were other people. Queenie Soriano, a young athletic trainer, still employed at San Diego State University, will testify that one of the first games of the year, it's timeout during a game, she's squatting down, she's tending to a player who had been injured or had blood on their uniform or something to get the blood off. And Coach Burns walked by, grabbed her wrist, yanked her wrist, just knocked her over and just told her, that's not the time or place for this. Queenie Soriano is about 5'3". Mr. Chapin said this morning, well, why should anybody worry about retaliation from Coach Burns? Again, Mr. Barrett is 6'2", Mr. Sturck's strong, Mr. Wicker's strong. Well, you're going to hear Queenie Soriano say she didn't even want to talk to Mr. Wicker when he asked to interview her about these incidents because he felt intimidated. He was very concerned that if Coach Burns found out that she was talking to the athletic department, that Coach Burns would retaliate against her. And she's going to take the stand and you can assess her credibility. She's a very genuine and very compelling witness. She just wanted, like Mr. Larson, like Ms. Bramer, like everyone else, she just wanted to do her job. And the fact that she wasn't doing what Beth Burns wanted her to do at the moment, okay, but there's no reason it has to escalate to yelling, screaming, and it certainly doesn't need to escalate to physical hands-on. Physical hands-on. Now, I mentioned to you, Mr. Barrett said that went on all the time, and he didn't appreciate it. And again, he was pressed in his deposition about, well, you're a 6'2" guy. What do you care about Coach Burns? You know what his testimony was? Let's reverse seats. What if I'm Coach Burns at 6'2", I'm male, and Coach Burns is the assistant coach, and I hit Coach Burns the way she struck me? What do you think would happen to me? What do you think would happen to me? And that's a very fair point. We found there's another witness who will maybe come to testify. She's on video. Her name is Tammy Reese. She was an assistant coach on the same team as Barrett, Coach Burns. There's a Coach Woods. She's very supportive of Coach Burns. Coach Burns helped her get jobs after she left San Diego State. She's very grateful to Coach Burns. She's very candid in her assessment. She likes Coach Burns. There's other aspects of her she doesn't like, and she testified to an incident that occurred in her first year. This is 2011, that never percolates up, in which after practice one day, she was instructed by Coach Burns to call the strength and conditioning coach and to find out why he wasn't down there when he was supposed to be there at the end of practice. She called the strength and conditioning coach. He said, "I'm up here in the weight room, I'm ready for you guys." Well, that was contrary to what Coach Burns thought, so Tammy goes back to Coach Burns, says to Coach Burns, "Randy says he's all ready for us up there." Coach Burns went crazy. She grabbed her by the t-shirt, yanked her t-shirt, twisted it, pulled Tammy Reese towards her, and started reading her out, just like she had read out Jay Larson without physical contact. And within a couple of seconds, I think, realized that that was not a good thing to do. Ms. Reese didn't appreciate it at all, and she eventually let go and calmed down. The only reason I mention these things, no one went to the hospital. No one got hurt. But from the university standpoint, its employees should not have to go to work being concerned about being confronted by an out-of-control boss. You know, I understand Ms. Burns' anguish about losing her job. She says she was stunned and shocked or stunned and saddened. All of these employees were very stunned and very saddened about their encounters, the encounters that I've told you about with Coach Burns. So, after this incident, time doesn't permit, you're going to be tired of hearing this whole litany by the end of the trial. Mr. Bynum reports to Mr. Wicker. He saw the video. He's a videographer. The video you've got, the reason it's so grainy is it's not for TV. It's a game film that's taped for scouting. So unfortunately, we can't give it to you in high def and we can't pull in on it, but I think it serves its purpose. Mr. Bynum saw it. Mr. Wicker was approached by, according to one version, by a booster afterwards and said, "Why do you let her hit you and treat you like that?" He was very embarrassed by that. His family is in the stands. His wife and his in-laws are watching as this whole thing goes down, and he was embarrassed by it. He mentions it to Mr. Bynum. Mr. Bynum takes the video, takes it to Mr. Wicker, and they decide, well, we better start looking a little bit further into what's going on here. And that's when Mr. Wicker, now, whether you call it an investigation, quotes around it, or whatever, Mr. Wicker is her superior. He is her supervisor. He is the one that did her performance evaluations. You didn't hear any objection by plaintiff's counsel to Mr. Wicker doing a performance evaluation of Coach Burns in 2011 and 2012 when she got good grades. He was apparently competent enough to do that. But when these incidents arose and Mr. Wicker went out to find out what the heck is going on here, all of a sudden there's an objection from Mr. Wicker. He's not competent to do this. He didn't take the right notes. It's all just nitpicking, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what notes he took. It doesn't matter who he interviewed. The issue at the end of the day is what's their cause for her termination. And what does he find out? He finds Coach Burns lost her temper on the team bus after losing to Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, yelling for an extended period of time that the team sucks. Incident where Mr. Bynum was setting up Peterson Gym for practice, and Coach Burns said, "Are the baskets 10 feet?" And Mr. Bynum said, "Yes," and she called him a liar. She called him unprofessional in front of the other staff. There's another incident that he recorded where Coach Burns referred to her assistants as effing idiots. He found from interviewing the academic support staff, which is a very important component of the athletic department. You're going to hear from Lucas Mooseman. He is with a college up in the Sacramento area now. He was the head of academic support. He had a lot of engagement with Coach Burns. He said he's never been treated in his career by a coach, any athletic coach, in any program he's been. He's never been treated the way he was treated by Coach Burns. One of the key academic advisors is a woman by the name of Bree White. You have this is a chronology that I put up. These are some of the women at San Diego State who are going to be testifying you're going to hear about. One of the people you're going to hear about is Sabrina White. She has a doctorate, so Dr. Sabrina White. She's the Director of Student Athlete Academic Support Services at San Diego State. She was one of the academic support advisors for the women's basketball team during Coach Burns' tenure. Coach Burns constantly complained that Bree White was incompetent. She said that to Mr. Mooseman. She said it to people in the athletic department. She disparaged Bree White whenever anyone would listen. Now, you've heard a little bit, and I'm going to get into this in a second, about Title IX. Bree White is not a Title IX issue. Bree White was an academic advisor for women's basketball. She was an academic advisor for football. And yet, when you see the litany of so-called complaints of Coach Burns, she's going to talk about tutoring. Her complaint about tutoring was she thought Bree White was incompetent. The same way she complained to her superiors about Jenny Bramer being ineffective. And so, while we're here, I mentioned Tammy Reese, I mentioned Heidi Vanderveer. Angie Garza is another woman that worked within the athletic equipment services who had a number of very poor encounters with Coach Burns. Colleen Evans was the formerly in academic support. She was the subject of much criticism by Coach Burns. And Dr. White. And then you're going to see, and the reason I put this together for men and women, this is the women's side, is in a case in which gender equity is supposedly an issue, you're going to see that, again, this isn't the old boys club. Many of these people are people who were berated by or had very poor relationships and encounters with Coach Burns, and they're women. And they're highly accomplished women. They're women who have earned their positions. They're women who come to San Diego State every day, and they try and do the best in their job, and they try to do the best for their university. If you flip it onto, this is fun. Again, this is a list of men. Dr. Hirschman is the president of San Diego State University. He will be here to testify about the notice to him of the decision to terminate Coach Burns. He saw the video. He'll tell you about his reaction to it and whether that was consistent with what they expected of folks at San Diego State. You know Mr. Wicker, Mr. Overhelman will be here. Mr. Larson, he's at Cal Berkeley now. He's coming down. Mr. Mooseman will come here to testify. Mr. Barrett's in Las Vegas, Nevada. He's not an employee of San Diego State. He may not be here because he's beyond the range. But we have his video, so you get a chance to see and hear Adam Barrett. Michael Bynum, the videographer, he's local. He will be here to testify. Jim Saline, he's an assistant media relations director The story on him is that in 2012 they needed a media relations person for women's basketball. The current assistant, Peggy Curtin, was leaving. They had a search to replace the person. A search committee came down to and recommended there was a woman who was recommended for the position as the #1 candidate. The woman turned down the position. They went to the #2 candidate, as rated by the committee as the second most highly qualified, and that's Jim Saline. And he served in that capacity, and yet Coach Burns complains that selecting Mr. Saline as the media relations person for women's basketball was discrimination or some kind of violation of Title I. He doesn't dispute that he was the next most qualified person. She just believes that that's a violation of either gender discrimination or Title IX. Mr. Saline will probably testify. Finally, we have Mr. Steve Fisher, who many of you may know. He's the head basketball coach for the men's team at San Diego State since 1999. Has had a remarkable record of success. Brought back full house crowds at VA House Arena. Filled the place up for home games. They've had a tremendous record of success. He's a friend of Coach Burns. They get along quite well. Has no criticism of her. Believes she's a very good basketball coach. But at the same time, on these issues, if you ask Coach Fisher, well, were you aware of any gender equity issues between your program and Coach Burns? He said, I never heard of that. I'm not aware of any, and I've never heard of it. So he'll be here to testify. Back up and go on the timeline, and we'll finish off with this. After much discussion between Mr. Wicker and his boss, Mr. Sturck. Mr. Sturck was Sally Roush, who was the vice president of the University on Business Affairs, and the input of Rochelle Thaler, who was temporarily in there for human resources. The collective decision was this wasn't a matter just for Coach Burns' evaluation. There needed to be something done. And the reason was, if you go back to the talking points, this is the bottom line. Beth's public persona is different, and in fact, she was recently awarded the Woman of the Year by the San Diego County Girl Scouts. However, there isn't any reason to believe, based on her inability to sustain any changes to her behavior after previous counseling sessions, that counseling or any other disciplinary step would ensure that she not shove, push, pull, slap, or hit an employee. So they made the decision that under the terms of Coach Burns' agreement, given where they were, given the prior counseling, given the prior issues, that nothing was going to change. And this was not something that should have been a surprise to Coach Burns, given the attention it had been given by her supervisors over the many years. Now, she was 27-7 or something that year, 27-9. She had a fantastic record. That's not an easy decision. But again, winning isn't everything. And the determination that was made at that point in time that this was conduct that was seriously prejudicial to the interests of the university and the athletic department, decision was made to terminate. There was a meeting on April 16th. At the meeting, council told you this morning that she was threatened that if she didn't do something, she'd lose her retirement benefits. Everybody who's in that meeting is going to deny that ever happened. Her retirement benefits are provided by CalPERS. It's a separate retirement system that's totally separate from the university. The university has no control over her retirement benefits. The university, Mr. Stirk, Mr. Wicker, and Ms. Thaler went through the decision with her, and we heard a lot of discussion about her reputation. In that meeting, there was a discussion about the issuance of a press release. What the evidence is going to be, San Diego State never did anything, nothing, zero, to publicize that Coach Burns was being terminated for the reasons it terminated her. You'll see a press release that was prepared in advance of the meeting. You'll see that during the course of the meeting, Coach Burns was given the opportunity to, and did in fact help edit the press release. So the press release announced that she was retiring. They went through the process with her, and that after the meeting concluded, the university did nothing. In fact, refused to comment to the press or anyone about the reasons behind Coach Burns' termination. So what you're going to see is, to the extent that Coach Burns feels that her reputation has been harmed or damaged by this, first of all, I think you ought to look at who's accountable for that. Who's accountable for the incidents that gave rise to the decision? The second thing is, what you're going to see is that the publicity on this was not generated by San Diego State. It was generated by there's comments and quotes from counsel for Coach Burns in the newspaper. There's no comments by counsel for the university or the university in the newspaper. And so the suggestion that the university in this termination meeting set out to destroy Coach Burns' career or to damage Coach Burns' career is simply wrong. I heard this morning that this has ruined Coach Burns' career. I don't think that's the case. That was certainly never intended by anyone. But I can tell you that less than a year later, on April 14th of 2014, Coach Burns signed a contract to become the associate head coach of the University of Southern California women's basketball team. She had a one-year contract. She's had a two-year contract since that time. She's had a pay raise to about $165,000 or $170,000, benefits that all go along with this, and she has been functioning and apparently will continue to function in the position of associate head coach of the University of Southern California women's basketball team, with all benefits, including retirement benefits. She never lost any of her retirement benefits from SDSU, and she's obtaining retirement benefits from USC. I want to switch at this point in time to Title IX and how this plays into the case. And I'm not going to be as long with this as I was with the product development. If you could put up the Title IX slide. Title IX, in a nutshell, stands for equal opportunity. Title IX is not an athletic, it's not limited to athletics, but you read about it, it applies to universities and colleges that receive federal funds. And it calls for equal opportunity between men and women in educational opportunities, and in particular, as it relates to athletics, I'm sure you've seen maybe newspaper articles and articles. San Diego State is a great place to be a female student athlete. Coach Burns had success with the women's basketball team, but there's another 12 teams, women's soccer, water polo. A lot of these teams have achieved success, NCAA tournaments, things of that nature. They all have very fine coaches that are all dedicated to their players.
much as I believe Coach Burns believes she was dedicated to her players. You see here that the university fields 13 varsity sports for women and 6 for men, and that's a product of Title IX. And one of the big drivers here is when you have men's football, you have 80-something roster spots. So when you're allocating participations in sports, you have to compensate. If you're going to have 80 football players, you've got to have a compensating balance on the other side. So you may have read about some of this in the press. What this has resulted in is schools increasing the number of opportunities for women to meet the intent of Title IX. And some schools, and there's been litigation about this, have dropped men's teams in order to achieve the necessary balance. If you go to the next slide, so what you see, and this is currently, but this is very similar to what you would see back when Coach Burns was at the university. San Diego State has 310 female student athletes on their rosters, on the varsity teams, and has 236 male student athletes. Now you might look at that and say, how's that equal opportunity? Well, it's equal opportunity because the measurement of Title IX, at least as far as participation is concerned, is what is the percentage of women to men or men to women in your student body? And in San Diego State's case, for many years now, it's 54, 55, 56% women in the student population. Correspondingly, there's a much lesser number of men in the population. So San Diego State has currently this balance, which more than complies with the requirements of Title IX. More than meets the requirements of Title IX. And this didn't happen by serendipity or circumstance. What you're going to hear from the witnesses is that the university has a strong record of compliance with Title IX. They put into place back in the early 2000s a gender equity plan. They have committees who are involved in revising that plan as circumstances change. They have Title IX coordinators throughout the university, in particular in the athletic department. Jenny Bramer is the Title IX coordinator. You will see that what the university does here, having a gender equity plan and being proactive, is a best practice as identified by the NCAA. It's not up there, but you'll also see that, and it's publicly available, every year the university has to report to the NCAA, not only on its participation rates, but on these so-called laundry list items. How much money are you spending on the men's teams versus the women's teams? What are you spending it on? Equipment. It breaks it down by equipment, scholarships, food, the whole thing. And the university has people who basically spend a lot of their time filing these reports with the NCAA and with the Office of the Civil Rights, because Title IX is really under the jurisdiction of the Department of Education. So there's a lot of effort that has gone into Title IX at San Diego State. And San Diego State is frankly very proud of its record on Title IX. And you will see, in fact, some laudatory comments that are in fact made by Coach Burns about the leadership of the university in that respect. And in particular, in 2012, the year prior to her termination was the 40th anniversary of Title IX. There were seminars and celebrations of Title IX. Coach Burns spoke at those seminars, and she extolled the leadership of President Hirschman and Mr. Sturp in leading the effort with respect to women's basketball and Title IX at San Diego State University. So then what were her complaints about? Making a complaint is not a protected disclosure. Complaining about anything and everything is not protected disclosure. You're going to see, and you can break Coach Burns's complaints to the extent they exist. They're mainly verbal. There's not much in writing by Coach Burns over these many years. She often complained about colleagues and staff being incompetent and ineffective. She complained about her budget, or the budget. She wanted more money. The athletic director of San Diego State is very familiar with that request. The coaches of the other 18 teams are in there asking for more money. Everybody wants more money. And let's put this in perspective. San Diego State University is a public university. It is a state university. It doesn't have the resources of a lot of the larger private institutions and prestigious institutions like Stanford or whatever else. But moreover, in California, it was also subject to the same, all the budget cuts that everybody else had in 2007 through 2009. They were subject to all the furloughs. You're going to see that hit some of the tutoring people that suffered. Didn't have people there, people were on furlough. San Diego State does not have unlimited resources. And then you say, well, how about these schools like Alabama and Ohio State and all these schools? These states seem to have everything. Well, they're in these, what's called the power conferences. They're in the Big Ten, they're in the Pac-12, they're in the Big 12. These are conferences that have mega television contracts, licensing deals. San Diego State's athletic budget may be $40 million a year. You go to those universities, it could be 2, 3, 4 times that. So every coach is fighting for their piece of the pie. Every coach wants more money. And you will see that, in fact, when there were discussions about Coach Burns' budget, that the people at the university who were involved in that, Mr. Lang, who's head of the business affairs, he would sit down with Coach Burns and they would try and work through the budget. They would try and find money so she could pay more money and give raises to her assistant and coaches and to a videographer. You're going to see a number of examples of that whereby it's a back and forth. Let's see what we can do. Can we move money from here to there? But the point is, asking for resources, saying, I want something that I don't have for women's basketball, that's not a Title IX complaint. That's not a gender equity complaint. You will also see that she didn't like being inconvenienced. I don't blame her. Sometimes her practices were moved from VA House Arena because there's a concert going on. It gets moved to Peterson Gym, and then volleyball's there, so it gets moved to the Student Recreation Center. And Coach Fisher will tell you, I get it, because the same thing happened with men's basketball. And you deal with it and you live with it, because that's what you have on your campus. It's not a Title IX complaint. Now, let's talk about, Mr. Chapin put up something called a laundry list of treatment issues under Title IX. I'm not sure where we're going with this. This provision of equipment and supplies, the example I heard there was in January of 2012 or 2013, they didn't have their travel sweats. And he puts up a tweet that said the men were on their 5th uniform or something like that. But the evidence is going to show there's a long email trail. This is the 1 year he talks about it. It was the 1 year Nike's the vendor. The sweats were supposed to be ready in October. The vendor screwed up. You're going to see a long email trail where everybody is talking to Nike saying, when are you going to get this done? They don't get it done on time. They offer Coach Burns some alternative sweats. She doesn't like those. They offer another alternative. She doesn't like those. And now she writes an email saying it's now January and I don't have my travel sweats. Well, I agreed. I thought everybody agrees. Mr. Wicker agreed, Mr. Sturck agreed, everybody agreed that Nike did a horrible job as it related to that particular order. It was inexcusable. Nike said, we'll make it up next year, and I think they did. But that's not the point. The point I'm raising with you is, this is one glitch on ordering travel sweats, and that's what this trial is about. I didn't have my travel sweats in 2012. And the suggestion was made that everybody had the flu because they didn't have sweatshirts and sweatpants. That's ridiculous. We agree Nike fell down. That's not the stuff of which Title IX is made. That's not why Congress passed Title IX. It's not to redress every inconvenience we have. Let's talk about scheduling of games and practice time. I don't know. Coach Burns is involved in scheduling of games. Generally, there are games that men are playing on the road and the women are playing at home, and that's been the scheduling of games for years. And she has substantial input on scheduling. Practice times, I think even Coach Fisher will tell you. Every once in a while, I get a call from Coach Burns. We had the early practice at VA House. She'd rather have that. If we'd go later, I'd say fine. There's no issue of inequity on practice. He checks out travel and per diem allowance. I have no idea what he's talking about. The travel and per diem allowance for the women's basketball was the same as for the men's basketball. Opportunity to receive coaching and academic tutoring. The academic tutoring related to what Coach Burns thought Bree White was an incompetent. Well, Bree White is not incompetent. Bree White is works at San Diego State. She works with all the sports, and she works fine with all the sports. Coaching, there's some suggestion, well, Coach Fisher makes a lot more money than Coach Burns. The school is very cognizant of equity in pay. And if you look at the schedules, you will see, yes, Coach Fisher makes more than Coach Burns. Amongst Mountain West Conference coaches, their peers, Coach Fisher is the second highest paid coach amongst the men coaches. And if you look at Mountain West Conference women's basketball coaches, Coach Burns is the second highest paid women's coach within the Mountain West Conference. So Title IX is about equal opportunity. Do women basketball players have the same opportunity? Do they get a quality coach? Yes. Do the men get a quality coach? Yes. Title IX doesn't say we're going to have to pay the women's coach $700,000 because the men's coach makes $700,000. And I'm not going to get into all the economics, but I think many of you probably know the only sports that produce any real revenue on any campus are, unfortunately, it's men's basketball and football. Every other sport loses money. The men's basketball team fills the VA House Arena, and unfortunately, and I do agree with this, right, not enough people go to watch women's basketball. So they might get 500, 750 people at a game, maybe 1,000. And VA House is filled with 12 or 13,000 for the men's games. That's just the public, that's the popularity of the sport. I agree that it seems wrong that when students, athletes, and coaches work as hard as they do at women's basketball, the more people don't go, but you can't legislate what the public wants to see. This was assignment and compensation of coaches and tutors. I think I've addressed this. Locker rooms, they both had locker rooms in the VA House Arena. One was renovated earlier than the other one was renovated. Provision of housing and dining facilities and services. Housing, all of the men's basketball players and women's basketball players when they came to campus, were housed in one facility. It's called Aztec Corners. They got the same housing facilities. When they moved off campus, they chose to move off campus, men and the women got the same amount to compensate for their off-campus housing. When they ate on campus, they got the same dining facilities, men's sports and women's sports. You were told a story this morning about McDonald's coupons. Think about that. We're in 2016. We're in a Title IX case. The story you were told was about, this happened in 2005. Coach Burns comes to campus. Some of her students came a day or two early. The dorm was open, but none of the dining facilities were open. This isn't a women's basketball issue. This was a facilities issue. Coach Burns goes to Miss Bramer, says, "What are we going to do? My players aren't here. They don't have any food." I'm not sure why they were there. They didn't need to be there, but they were there. NCAA rules, everybody knows you can't give them cash. Coach Burns says they're poor. Jenny Bramer says, "What do you want me to do? I can't get a dining room open for 2 or 3 student athletes." And she goes and she comes back with some McDonald's coupons and says, "Coach, this is all I can do." And Coach Burns has railed against her for years. She thinks that was insulting. And she thinks that somehow that's a violation of Title IX. I asked her in depo and I said, "Well, this situation where the dining room wasn't open for the women's basketball team, is that different for the men?" "I don't know. I don't think so." And I asked her, I said, "Well, why is that a Title IX violation?" She says it's a resource issue. They should have done something more. So our view is that at the end of the day, what you're going to see is you're going to see some emails, you may hear some testimony about some complaints. I'm sure there were legitimate complaints and some were worked out, but you're not going to see anything of the nature that counsel described to you, whereby Coach Burns was blowing the whistle. She didn't blow the whistle on anything. And there's going to be no evidence that she blew the whistle on anything. I'm sure she fought for her athletes. I'm sure she wanted them to get the best possible treatment. But advocating for your team and claiming that the school is violating Title IX or is engaged in improper governmental activity are 2 entirely different things. I'm not going to go through the contract with you. You saw that there were provisions in the contract that permitted termination for cause. Those contracts were negotiated by Coach Burns. She had the benefit of an agent, a gentleman by the name of John Meadows. He was involved in negotiating all of her contracts at San Diego State. He's from Colorado. He represents tens, if not hundreds, of women basketball coaches. He knows what he's doing. She testified she read all the contracts. She understood the contracts. She talked to her agent about the contracts. She understood when she signed the contracts that there were provisions in the agreements that called for earlier termination. She was aware of that when she signed her first contract in 2005. That remained in the 2007 contract. And subsequently, when they added addendums in 2010 and 2012, those provisions remained in her contract. So, again, this is not someone slipping in some fine print and trying to do a gotcha on someone. These are the provisions that are in the contract. The second thing you need to know is that in the public arena, there are statutes and regulations that you'll hear about, which give employers such as San Diego State University, when dealing with managerial or supervisorial employees, they give them great discretion to make decisions. That is, if you're not in a bargaining unit or you're not a civil servant, a permanent civil servant, you don't have these procedures entitled like Skelly procedures and things like that, rights to hearings and all that stuff. You're a managerial or supervisorial employee, and you're viewed that way under the law. And in the provisions that govern Coach Burns' contract, it expressly states she serves at the pleasure of the chancellor or the campus president. So she could be terminated at any time, for any reason. The issue is, when she was terminated in this case, was there cause or was there no cause? Because if there was cause, there's no further financial obligation. But if there is no cause, they owe her the balance of her agreement, less what she's made at USC. And that, at the end of the day, is going to be the issue. And finally, I think the last thing I want to say before I sit down is, with respect to Mr. Stirk, a lot of statements have been made about Mr. Stirk. Mr. Stirk will be here, he'll testify. He's highly, I don't want to say decorated, that's not the right word. He's received a lot of awards for his work in the field of athletics. He's very committed to Title IX. He did a very good job at the university. He just took a position. Council mentioned about people moving up. He's going to take a position as the University of Missouri athletic director, I think, starting next week. Jenny Bramer is the interim acting athletic director. But what I want to say about Mr. Stirk, there was some suggestion that he threw away notes, or he acted in a dishonest fashion, or he was sneaking around, or he was engaged in some kind of frame-up of Coach Burns. Nothing could be further from the truth. You saw an email that Mr. Chapin focused on in opening. We talked about the extension for Ms. Burns and her contract in 2012. And the issue was, under her prior contract, they agreed every 2 years to take a look at whether she would be extended again. And in 2012, Mr. Stirk wrote the email to Ms. Roush and others saying, here's the issue, it's come up. We talked to her agent. Her agent wants certain things. Do we extend her for another? Do we give her a new contract extending her from 2015 to 2017? And he made a comment to the effect that, in parentheses, that he was okay with extending her. But he wanted a way to separate, I think is what he said, is that she continues to drive him crazy with complaints. Coach Burns in her deposition said, we made complaints daily. She made complaints daily. Now, I don't know who she made them to, because there's not much of a record to it, but there was an issue, and you'll hear the athletic department personnel talk about it, that a lot of her complaints simply weren't productive. They weren't about gender equity. The university tried to help her, and she wasn't satisfied with the outcome. That's all he meant. If Mr. Stirk wanted to get rid of Coach Burns, and he didn't like Coach Burns, all he had to do was say in 2012, I'm not extending her. He could have just said, I'm not giving her an extension. And then her contract would have went out in 2015. He didn't do that. He signed on to an extension for an additional 2 years. So I think at the end of the day, everybody's going to color and spin and take a look at these facts, but I think at the end of the day, when you have to take a look at actually what's on paper and what really transpired here, you're going to see that this termination decision had nothing to do with Title IX or gender equity, and it had everything to do with Coach Burns and her conduct and the university's assessment as to whether that conduct constituted cause and grounds for termination. So I would ask you that during the course of the evidence, you stay focused and stay with the issues, because I think those are the essential issues that you're going to have to deal with at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.